As we've heard on several occasions, Newnham College has got a particular sense of connection with Virginia Woolf. We've heard about her talk to the Art Society, and when she came, she was asserting that writing is based on material conditions which cannot be ignored. These webs, she said, are not spun in mid-air by incorporeal creatures. And in a speech shortly afterwards to the London National Society for Women's Service in 1931, Woolf continued to muse in this vein. When I came to write, she said, there were very few material obstacles in my way. Writing was a reputable and harmless occupation. The family peace was not broken by the scratching of a pen. No demand was made upon the family purse. For 10 and 6pence, one can buy paper enough to write all the plays of Shakespeare, if one has a mind that way. Pianos and models, Paris, Vienna and Berlin, masters and mistresses, are not needed by a writer. The cheapness of writing paper is, of course, the reason why women have succeeded as writers before they have succeeded in the other professions. And who better today to consider why women have succeeded as writers than Nicola Beauman, who began her publishing company Persephone, which I'm sure we all know and love, in 1998 to order to reprint neglected classics by 20th century writers, mostly women. The distinctive dove grey jackets signal a treasure trove of writers' works, novels, diaries, memoirs. Myself, I've regarded Persephone books as a kind of heavenly lucky dip. I buy randomly and find writers that I hadn't known before. I think that there are currently 90 books in print. I look to many more, and with that I'll hand over to Nicola.
Right, is it working? Yes. One of the books, is it still working? Yes. One of the books we print is a novel by E.M. Delafield called Consequences. And Consequences is about an Edwardian girl whose mother only foresees marriage for her. And Monica, in another novel called Thank Heaven Fasting, and Alex, in this novel, because they're the same girl, don't manage to catch husbands. And Alex, in Consequences, goes into a convent. Now, when Sarah was talking, I was so incredibly struck by the fact that she was actually talking about 500 years ago, but so little changed for so long. The description of Alex in the convent is absolutely heartrending. It's no different from the details you gave. It's absolutely unbelievable. Well, I might as well give the plot away. So eventually she comes out of the convent. It's just before the First World War by now. She goes to stay with her sister in Hampstead, who finds her extremely embarrassing and doesn't know how to deal with her. She makes some financial mistake for which her brother is extremely censorious because he doesn't understand that she's never handled money herself. And eventually she weighs her coat down with stones in a gesture that will be familiar to all of us here, and drowns herself in one of the Hampstead ponds. Now, that novel was published in 1919. I mean, it's incredibly recent. So all those centuries, nothing had changed. And I thought I'd mention that novel because when Patricia very kindly asked me to speak for the launch of the Literary Archive, we had quite a lot of confusion about what I was going to talk about. And I've been variously billed as talking about why women writers write well and why women writers succeed. Well, of course, you can't actually give a talk about either of those subjects. I mean, you know, why do women succeed? Answer, they overcome a lot of obstacles. And why do women write well? Why shouldn't women write well? They are 50% of the human race. So I thought that I would talk, you won't be surprised to hear, about the canon, the great tradition, and plus ça change, or rather plus ça has not changed, except I was terribly happy to hear Sarah say that when she was here 30 years ago, the feminist revolution had by then started. It had not started when I was here in the early 60s. I give quite a lot of talks. I'm not telling you this boastfully, I'm only just about to explain something. Because I run a mail order company, we sell our books by mail order, we have 25,000 people on our mailing list. Well, we have to keep those 25,000 coming. And I do that by giving talks in libraries or WIs or literary festivals or wherever. And I've found over the years that what people like best is if I talk absolutely as though I'm talking to them immediately, as though there's just you and me. And I explain about how I used to be a biographer, and then I started Persephone Books because my first book was about women writers and what fun it is running a publishing company and how we have a shop and it's very nice. And I don't usually write my talks, and I'm just telling you this because I have written what I'm going to say, and this is extremely unusual for me. And the reason I've done it is because I do feel that the launch of the Newnham Literary Archive is a rather important, wonderful occasion where I couldn't actually just get up in a slightly girlish, immediate, I'm talking to you way, talk about Persephone Books and whatever. I do think it's fantastic that Newnham now has a literary archive. If you think about it, we should have done it years ago. And when I was writing my what I'm about to tell you about, my husband, of course, read it, and as he always does, particularly when I write books, scratched through half of it. And because I don't really have anyone else's opinion to go on, I do actually usually follow what he says. But I did scratch out a paragraph about archives, which was a little bit of a rant about why does King's have Frances Partridge and Rosamund Lehman, and why does Girton not have Rosamund Lehman, because she was there, and why have we never had a Newnham archive before? Of course we do. I mean, the library does have some papers, we mustn't forget that, as we know. But this is a start of something extremely exciting, and I think in 50 years this will be a kind of marking point. So I'm terribly proud to be part of the archive. And I'm terribly proud to be speaking here, but some of the things I'm going to say will be a bit bitter, so I'm just apologising in advance. I know that a lot of people in the audience have given all kinds. Oh yes, I've forgotten to say something else, sorry, you can see I'm no good at organising the structure of my talks, which is I'm only going to talk for about 20 minutes. I'm going to make 15 points. So I want you all to listen hard, and then I hope we're going to have a really lively discussion where you pick me up on a lot of the more contentious points, and also we do pay tribute more to the women over the 500 years who've had no voice, because it is extraordinary really that we are the first generation who are able to have this amazing voice. So it's a short talk. I know that people in the audience have given all kinds of different things, and I've given the original manuscript of my book about women writers. I haven't looked yet at the archive, but after lunch I'm going to. But it's a file of the original manuscript and of my correspondence with Virago. I was a bit embarrassed about giving it in a way because it has quite a lot of rather personal stuff, but I also feel what's the point of hogging it at home when in 50 years somebody will be able to write quite an interesting MA thesis about feminist publishing in the late 20th century. And I think there is the scope there. It's too early yet, but anyway, that's what I've given. It includes the rather fascinating and in some ways rather upsetting editing imposed on it, or perhaps some would say improving it, by the editors of Virago. I'm also one day going to give this jacket. Have a little look at it. It's designed by two women. It's 1964, Sally Tuffin and Marion Fole, and why it has never got moth, I can't think. But I think it's very important that the Newnham Archive has a few things that future scholars will think is rather odd. But we do care about clothes, and you can look at it afterwards. It's got buttons in a rather wonderful fabric, which actually would make a good Persephone end paper one day. So I'm going to talk about the great tradition, or in a different terminology, the canon. I want to point out some of the ways the canon has constricted women, celebrate the death of the old-fashioned concept of the canon, and then open up a discussion about how you feel about it. First of all, though, I want to make the point that things change so much in the last 30 years. It's interesting, I've written 30 years, and Sarah mentioned 30 years, that undergraduates in the audience will find it almost impossible to understand the constraints imposed on women writers who are still writing. In other words, the constraints are still there at the back of our heads. It was to celebrate the huge changes that were enjoyed by her and her contemporaries that Margaret Drabble asked in 1998, so a dozen years ago, do we need any support or special affirmation as women who write? When I talk to women friends of my generation and older, we tend to say that we don't need protection. We, as a group, consider that we have done rather well. We would be prepared to get divorced, hit men on the jaw, bring up children single-handed, or live on twopence halfpenny a week. In other words, we prefer to see ourselves not as victims, but as success stories. And I think probably by the late 90s that was no exaggeration, but I'm not sure you could have said it before that date. And it's true, she and her contemporaries are success stories, and they're sitting in the audience and they're donating things to the archive to prove it. But only 40 years ago, in 1971, it was very different. In that year, the novelist Elizabeth Taylor was shortlisted for the Booker Prize for Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. The largest part of the budget spent on the prize was spent on bringing Saul Bellow over from the States to be one of the judges. From the start of the judging process, he behaved rather overbearingly. The other judges had to hear an awful lot about his irritation that his room at the Ritz did not overlook the park. And he began the first meeting by saying about Elizabeth Taylor's Mrs. Palfrey, "I seem to hear the tinkle of teacups." Well, that settled it. The prize was won by a novel mostly set in Africa, V.S. Naipaul's In a Free State. Did anyone among the judges find this massive condescension to women outrageous? Had Bellow never heard of Jane Austen? Did anyone complain that Bellow despised women and tea and drawing rooms? But no, the mere mention of a drawing room was apparently enough to make men cringe.